The person who wrote the book, The Strange Life of Ivan Ouspensky, his name is P.D. Ouspensky, mathematician, astronomer, very interested in tarot cards and magic, witchcraft. But he had a great scientific mind. And we're talking about a time where World War I or World War II, Russia was just being crucified and was also in the business of crucifying others. Life had become completely meaningless for Ouspensky, and he said, you know what, I'm just going to go to India. And I'm going to go to India because I'm looking for something. I don't know what it is. It's like you keep dating and dating and dating, and someone, why do you keep dating? I'm looking for some qualities in men. I'm not quite sure what they are, but I'm looking for something, and I haven't yet found it. He comes to realize that maybe reading a lot of books is not helpful, listening to audio lectures is not helpful, so he goes to India. And he runs into some cults, but they're very demanding. And they say to him that if you want to join us, this is going to be the price that you have to pay. And by price, I don't mean money. Sometimes you have to keep your mouth shut because you're talkative. Sometimes you have a past that may be very rich. Sometimes it may be that you're just way too knowledgeable. And what they demanded was that you have to keep your mouth shut, you have to keep your intellect off for a long, long time. And you have to do as we say without any questions. And once you commit, you have to commit for about 5 years. And he couldn't do it. He goes back to Russia and he runs into a man named Gurdjieff, an Armenian philosopher. Ouspensky worked with Gurdjieff, and remember, whenever you have a teacher, you see your teacher as God. I'm not joking. You know, it's like when you fall in love with someone, you are going to look at this person as the embodiment of Venus, of Aphrodite, of Zeus, of all the deities that the Greeks invented, because you find in him or her all the qualities of the gods. Okay? And so he worked with Gurdjieff for a number of years. And then at a certain point, he came to realize, you know what? My teacher's attitude towards ideas are changing, and I'm not used to it, and I don't feel comfortable with it. And I think I can, to some extent, decipher, you know, right from wrong, good from bad, understand a few things myself. So he walks away, and he creates his own school, and he has his own pupils. And you have your own school because you think that, you know, you have some ideas about how things are. He gives one last talk before his death, Ouspensky does, before an audience of maybe 200-300 people, of Gurdjieff disciples as well as, you know, his own. And you know what he comes to say? These ideas have to be abandoned. They're no good. They don't take you anywhere. The word prophet is Greek. It means spokesperson. For example, I'm in my office, you're in my office, I say, Leah, can you go down to my class and tell them I'll be late 45 minutes? You become my mouthpiece. So a prophet becomes a mouthpiece for truth. Every time you turn on the TV on Sunday and there's a pastor out there, they're presumably the mouthpiece for God. Okay. Your question is, at what stage do you come to realize you're a counterfeit? There was this beautiful Christian saint. His name is Saint Aquinas. Aquinas is really the father of Christian theology for the most part. He wrote volumes. At the age of 49, it's like Jesus Christ all of a sudden went inside him, lifted his soul, took that soul to paradise, had that soul look at the face of God, and then pushed that soul back into his body. Aquinas comes back and says, everything I have said, everything I have written, everything I've ever fantasized, all wrong. Silence. That's the only way you understand. You know, revelations come to us in a variety of different ways. You know, you get married, things are wonderful, time comes in, and time slowly creates this book for you. And then at a certain point, you have the courage to open the cover and read page after page after page. And by the time you get to the middle, you realize there is nothing about this relationship that you enjoy. And then the second part of the book is about how to approach divorce, being single, no longer being labeled as a husband or a wife or a mother or a daughter, none of those things. And so I had a student in my office just before coming to class, and they were so worried about the grade. They were actually on my office floor crying, and just punching the floor. How could I have been so stupid? I had to calm them down. And I said, it doesn't really matter. The grade is unimportant. What grade do you want? And she says to me, I just want a passing grade. I said, okay, well, let me look into your wallet. I took some money and I gave her an A. The point I'm trying to make is this, we walk into different stages of our lives. The things that are important to you now are not going to be in 2 years' time. And then you're going to catch yourself and you're going to be a prophet to yourself. How could I have wasted so much time and energy valuing something that right now it's irrelevant? I think all of us will eventually come to that. People in power always assume themselves to be right. I mean, look at Donald Trump. I mean, I don't know if he's actually working behind the scenes, or there are people working behind the scenes, legislating all these ideas. I don't really know. My hope is that he's an 80-year-old man. And when you get up in age, the only thing waiting for you is just sickness. That maybe you get really, really sick. And then for the first time, you realize how people without healthcare feel. Being sick, being deprived of the basic things of life. Food, shelter, clothing, just decency. And that hopefully will transform him. And he will still have enough power to make some changes, first on himself and then society at large. The thing is, I think all of us are kind of ridiculous. It's one thing to be a spokesperson for truth, let's just say. You only have certain capacity. You can only have so much of the truth, otherwise you'll explode. There's a story in the Quran that the mountains looked at God and said, we want to get to know you. And God said, listen, that's really not a very good thing to desire. He says, no, we desire it. So God goes into the mountains and it shatters into 1,000 pieces. And the oceans look at God and say, we want you. Because the mountain was weak. And God says, listen, you're making the same mistake as the mountain. And God goes into the ocean and the ocean runs dry. And then comes the lions and the giraffes and all these things, and they all fall apart. And the point I'm trying to make is, in as much as you desire truth and the whole truth, the truth is all of us in this class have only certain capacity to only contain so much of it. And then your language allows for that truth to be expressed only to a certain degree. And then you have an audience. Okay? Some audience are not ready for it. Some listen but can't really understand. Some understand but can't really process it too well. Some can understand but can't really act on it. And you will only find one, maybe two, if you're lucky, in every generation, able to act on the truth that they can grasp. So when you talk about false prophets, maybe you can only speak of it without really understanding. You yourself. One of the things about us instructors, we read a lot of books, and sometimes if you have the creativity, you sit and think a lot of thoughts, but that doesn't mean you understand what you're writing or reading or talking about. I may come to class and talk about Pegasus, the winged horse, and Hephaestus, how love needs to be welded to you. Love. And I may be animated and I may be passionate. But I don't really know what welding does. I don't embody that experience. And though you may be moved, the truth is, I am only animated and I speak passionately without really understanding it myself. So am I false? I may be false, but that falseness to some extent benefits you because your capacity exceeds mine. It's what we talked about yesterday. If you're able to find decency in the devil will lead you to God. And then as time passes, you realize, oh my God, it was the devil. But that doesn't really matter. You're at God's presence now. Your question is no different than Yasamin's question in the sense that, long time ago, someone told me, if you follow me, I'll get you to point B. I followed that person there was no point B, and I realized it was a complete waste of time. Her question before your coming was that, this guy looked at me, he winked at me, I liked him, he said, I'll call you at 6 and I'll wink some more. The call never came, neither did the winking, so I was left alone and abandoned. I felt betrayed. A couple weeks passed by. All of a sudden he shows up at my work. He just keeps winking at me, like someone having Tourette's. And and then he writes me this beautiful poem, and he says, you're a rose, I'm a thorn. Because of you, I want to become a rose. And she says, well, he said all those things to me, and he failed to act upon the things that he said. Should I trust him now? And the answer is, well, it's a risk you take. It doesn't mean that if you guys spend time together, you won't fall in love with him. You definitely will. But it's best not to plan a future with this bozo. But nevertheless, you will experience love. You will become a poet. You will suffer the pains of separation and the ecstasy of union. That goes without saying. So, to be on the safe side, never listen to a 20-year-old. I mean, listen if they have some good things to say, but never assume that they know anything. They just read some books. And maybe they have a very powerful intuition, but that doesn't mean anything. Don't respect any 30-year-old, any 40-year-old, any 50-year-old, any 60-year-old, or 70-year-old. Wait until someone is very, very seasoned in life. And I say that for the following. We are emotional animals. You learn because your emotions force you to become curious about something. And that curiosity pushes you into the library. And then you check out books. And you lock yourself in a room and you just read and you read and you read. And you become very knowledgeable. Especially if you're able to piece ideas together harmoniously and then express them articulately. It's beautiful. But you have to be able to apply what you know. And in applying your knowledge in everyday real life experience, you realize 99.9% of the stuff that you know is just junk. It really is. It's not applicable to life. And if you find a good teacher, the only thing that teacher will focus on is the 1% that's good and useful in life. But for them to give you that 1%, they need to cover the 99.9%. You shouldn't ever ask your parents' marriage advice. And the reason is they were not born in the age of the internet. Probably your grandparents didn't have a backyard, they only just had front yards. Life was not as privatized as it is today, so they're just going to give you this old school philosophy that's no longer applicable today. And though it may sound good, you can't use it. And the other thing consider again the story of the rich young man. Okay. The more evolved the prophet, the more demands. And the more demands, the less the audience can actually do. And one of the reasons why we gravitate towards novice teachers is it's just hot air. Everything about them is just air. It's just like this huge bubble gum. The bubble is huge, but when you poke it, there is nothing in it. All these fancy big words. The chapter of the book that you read with Stacy and Cassie, it's about the magician, right? And what you have about the magician is he tells this young man, and the story is very interesting in the sense that all of a sudden this young man looks at this magician and says to him, I've been here before. And the magician says, yes, many times. And I've asked these questions before, yes, many times. Am I going to come back and see you again? Maybe. Can you take me back to the day of my birth so I can, change my life? He says, yeah, but you won't be able to. Why? Because knowing something and knowing what to do with the things you know are two very, very different matters. Having all the ingredients is very different than knowing what to do with the ingredients. My wife always gives me like a shopping list. Go to this place and get A, B, C, D. The idea of me putting them on the counter and then chopping them and making a dish, that's not possible. I wouldn't know what to do with this stuff. Then at a certain point, this young kid, Ivan Ouspensky, is horrified because he comes to realize that if you were to go back to when you were 20 with all the knowledge you have now, in other words, you go back not with the innocence of youth, But you go back with the burden of having old experience in a very young body. What are you going to do? And the magician tells him, you will do whatever you possibly can to forget all that you know, because you wouldn't know what to do with what you know. And it's burdensome, you know. And so at a certain point, being paralyzed by this particular insight, Ouspensky looks at the magician and says, so what do you suggest? And this is where the false prophet comes in. The magician looks at Ouspensky and says to him, you're always going to be standing before a mirror asking yourself a question you asked when you were 2, and then 5, and then 10. Who am I? What am I doing? Where am I going? How should I live my life? Who am I? Where am I going? What am I doing? How should I live my life? And you ask this when you're 2, when you're 5, when you're 25, when you're 35, 45, 55, and then when you're 90 on your deathbed, you say, everything I did was wrong. I mean, talk about the burden of reincarnation and resurrection. And this is where the false prophet again comes in. The magician tells him, since you're going to waste your time, since your life is moving in a circle, every year you're going to be asking the same question. I will show you a way. If you follow me, become blind, give me your life for 5 years. You're going to waste it. Give it to me for 5 years. And if you give it to me, you will stand before the mirror, but you will never ask those questions again. You will never reincarnate. And he says, go back, go home, and think. Do you have the capacity to take this leap of faith? Give me your life. Let me think for you. Let me feel for you. I mean, look, what exactly is it that you feel every single day? I hate my classes. I hate my instructors. I hate my life. And you've been feeling this for the past like 20 years. And what is it that you think about? What do I do with all the hate that lives inside me? It's relentless. It's never ending. You know, talk about like eternal life. These emotions and this thought process, they have no end to them. And the magician says, there is a way I can put them to death, but it's going to be very costly. Every time you raise your hand and you say, I have a question, I'm going to smack your hand down. The moment you open your mouth and say, I have some ideas about this, you have nothing to say and you have nothing to feel. You keep your thoughts and you keep your emotions shut for the next 5 years. Let me give you the tools, the magician tells them. Let me give you the tools, how to think, how to feel, but more importantly, how to see, how to hear, what things are worth looking at, what things are worth listening to, and what things are worth thinking about and feeling about. A 27-year-old guy is not worth your time, despite how good they look on the resume. You know why education is the way it is? People look good on paper. Now, could the magician be a false magician? Absolutely. Could the magician desire Ouspensky's body and he's saying all these profound, fancy things to bed him? Maybe. Could Ouspensky be rich and the magician simply tempts him so he can get his money? Maybe. Is magician lonely, simply wants to manipulate some poor chap out there? Maybe. Could the magician also be true? Maybe. You know, we have this thing called intuition. It is true sometimes you're led astray. It deceives us. It's also true. I mean, I kid you not. You will know after a month of being in a relationship with anyone. Your intuition will tell you if it's going to work out or not. But it is far too big of a cross to carry. So we con and deceive ourselves. I think whenever you come across a prophet of sorts, you know, whether it's like a fitness guru or, you know, all those YouTubers, their body language, the tone of their voice, the way they express and articulate ideas, something about you will either resonate, gravitate towards that, or you're repelled by it. And if you're asked, next question would be, how will I know? The truth is, I don't know how intuition works. Intuition, like anything else, is like playing the piano. It takes time to get developed. And you have to, and some people, look, you can have a very powerful intuitive senses about you without having actual experiences, or you can have that intuition and all the senses related to the intuition developed through experience, observation, understanding. There is the intuition of Jesus Christ, and then there is the intuition of Moses. If you look at both figures, they're both honorable, they're both decent, they're both powerful. And they both have their own place in life. But I think Moses is much more valuable than Jesus is. And the reason is, I think Moses has been seasoned by life. He knows love. He knows what walking away from love does. He knows what it means to have been adopted, what it means to have figured out who your real mom is, that being a pharaoh is just a facade, a mask that you wear, how the desert life is, how you get married, not because you love, but because it's just part of the Bedouin tradition, how to have a desire or a quest that goes against life, against your partner, against your family, against your tradition, and yet you say, I want to go up there and I want to taste and see it myself, and then coming back as a social activist. And I think Moses does more good for people than Jesus, in the sense that the masses are unable to follow Jesus to the kingdom of God. It's too dark, it's too arduous, it's just too difficult, too complicated. Moses, on the other hand, no. Equality, parents, human decency in society. That's what we need, because most people can't walk the Jesus path. But all of us have no choice but to live the Mosaic life. We have no choice but to have parents. We have no choice but to get married. We have no choice but to have kids. We have no choice but to work for the Pharaoh. We have a job. You need to pay rent, And I think maybe Jesus understood this by saying, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. In other words, be a good Moses. But going back to your question, I think intuition is a craft that needs to be developed, cultivated slowly inside you. You have to be trained. You will never, ever, ever have the power to choose a teacher. That's not in your domain. Teachers will always choose you. And you could say maybe it's a mixture of both. There is a part of you that must gravitate towards this fellow, and there's a part of that fellow must like you. And the two of you must come together. And you go through 3 phases. First, the only thing, and you don't know why you like this person, okay? The teacher has only one function. The prophet only has one function: to be listened to be heard. That person doesn't really care about anything else. As a student, you're not there yet. So you like the teacher, but you don't know why. All you know is I just want to be around this person. So the first part of it is what we call ludos, or lust. You lust after this person. You don't know why you lust, but you lust because there's a part of you that's attracted to this person. The next comes eros. Eros is interesting in the sense that you want to occupy the physical space of this person. Wherever his or her body is, you want to be close to it. If he wore a jacket, you want to wear that jacket. If he sat on that chair, you want to sit on that chair. If there's a book that he read or she read, you want to read that book. The physical part. Now, remember, you want to be in the physical vicinity, but you don't really have a good understanding of why you feel this way and why you're pursuing this person. There comes a point where your teacher will no longer care about you physically being close. And I mean physical. Okay? Now, part of the difficulty, again, in that relationship, in this culture, because that narrative does not exist here, it's oftentimes romanticized. Okay? There is nothing wrong with that, by the way. There comes a point where your teacher, the only thing he or she demands of you is you need to get to a place where you're interested enough to understand. That gets into the philo part. What lives inside my brain, now you need to get that. You wanted to be around my physical body, you are. It's time for you to get close to my intellectual body. Now, that usually takes a few lifetimes. Now, the thing you need to understand is this: every teacher, every prophet has their own culture. And if you want to understand your teacher, you have to adopt their culture. Which means that even if you don't speak Persian, this is hypothetical. If you like me enough, They'll say, Amir, what do you think about me learning Persian? Now, if I'm a stupid man, I say, yeah, go ahead, learn Persian, it's beautiful. But I'm not that stupid. I say, listen, that's not going to serve you much. Okay? And then you're going to start liking my music. You're going to desire to hang out with my family and my parents whenever I go to Roseville. You want to come to my house. And slowly you begin to see those things. And then something strange will happen. When you go on dating sites, you're looking for Persian men. I am not joking. And I'm saying this because of experience. This is what happens. You know, I remember my own teacher when I went to his house. Man, I said, this guy, just his head is filled with like knowledge and wisdom, and I want it. So one day I said, Hussein, do you mind if I just go and meditate in your study? He says, no, Amir, we had a gathering there. I'm asocial by nature. So I go lock myself in the room. I turn on the light. And we didn't have cell phones there with cameras. So I take out my notepad and my pencil and I write down 1,000 books, the titles, all Persian. And I send that letter to my grandfather. Can you get me these books, please? And my assumption was, he is the way he is because of those books. And because I want to be like him, I got to read those books. Okay? There comes a point where your teacher will give you enough tools. And you say, you know what? I am now at the stage of falawsha, which is, I can be autonomous. I don't need to go to Hussein's house to be with Hussein. It's like, به دریا بنگرم دریا توینم به صحرا بنگرم صحرا توینم به هر جا بنگرم کوه و در و دشت نشون قامت رعنا توینم. You know, it's like when you're in love, you go to In-N-Out, the image of your lover is there. Physically it's not there, but he's just everywhere, right? And all of a sudden you realize you have spent so much time and you've created so much stories with your teacher that your teacher is just there inside you. Okay? And so when you go on a date, you speak like him. When you walk in the classroom, you speak like him. Everything about you is just an element of him. And you say, well, I don't really need to be around him as much, talk to him as much, see him as much. And then if you're lucky, comes the last stage, which is, I don't know how anyone gets it, and it's called agape. That there is this breakthrough, like the veils open and the veils are moved and the curtains open and you look and there is something about you that understands. Now you don't know what you understand, but that becomes your Sabbath, your resting place. Anyone who is divorced or anyone who's been depressed, what they'll tell you is, you go through like 20 years of this volatility, instability, your life is just upside down and you try to overcome it. And little by little, the emotions subside. One morning you wake up and you say, you know what? It's okay. Now, how the hell did that happen is beyond you. All you know is that you've reached your Sabbath. That's your resting place. And even if a companion was to come back and say, take me back, you say, no, I think I'm okay this way. And it's such a beautiful and freeing place, not without conflict, but something about you opens up. And then, for example, you have a friend who comes to you and says, well, how the hell did you get to this place? And the only thing you can say, listen, I know what you're going through. Just trust me. Don't think about that idiot so much. This will pass. But the problem is, they're at a place where they're consumed by emotions. You're at the end. You're at the resting place. You know what their future looks like. Okay? And you keep giving them pieces of wisdom or advice because you've gone through it, but they will never get it because they're in a different stage. And all you will ask them is, just trust me.